The major international operations I was involved with, probably the most famous was the taking down of the Medellin cartel that was led by Pablo Escobar. The global nature of DA's mission is important because it, it ties the international traffickers to the domestic traffickers working in our streets in the United States. So that combination, that linkage is very important because when we go after in a trafficking organization, we want to take down all of that trafficking organization. So we go after the bosses in foreign countries, and we go after, very important, the traffickers that are working in our streets of the United States. The international operation helps the American people in that we are targeting the local drug distributors working in our streets. For example, like I said, we got the big bosses in Colombia, and a trafficking organization obviously needs people that are distributing the drugs on the streets of the United States. So we're going after everybody that's involved, from the big bosses to the cell heads of the streets, to the money launderers, to the drug couriers, to the guys who are bringing the drugs across the border, however it may be. Could be by airplane, could be by sea, could be by land. So we're targeting all of the members of a trafficking organization. That's why it's important that when you take down somebody in a foreign environment, that you're also taking down their bosses that are distributing the drugs in our streets of the United States. Pablo Escobar is probably, like I said, the world's most recognized trafficker because of his name, but in reality, Pablo Escobar was the first Colombian trafficking organization that was set up in a manner that used violence, that used terrorism, that used intimidation. And Pablo Escobar at one point was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that was reaching the world. 80%. Now, I get to Colombia in 1988, and my boss, who was Joe Toft at the time, assigned me the Pablo Escobar investigation. My first partner was a guy by the name of Gary Sheridan. Gary Sheridan later gets on promoted and leaves Colombia. So basically, in 1988, I was investigating the organization of Pablo Escobar. Now, very important is that I call it the first search of Pablo Escobar because, like I said, we went after him, then he self-surrendered, then the escape in 1991. And after the escape is when I teamed up with my second partner, Steve Murphy, who came in from Miami. But the significance of us being in Colombia and the significance of the Colombian government asking for our assistance was very important, in that we had great partners. We had a lot of great... Huh? I'm sorry? Oh, was there a question on...
I'm sorry, no. Someone came in and interrupted us.
Okay.
Please, if you could go back to where you were a moment ago
Okay.
and restart. I'm sorry about that.
Not a
Thank
problem.
you.
Okay. Okay. I get to Colombia in 1988, and my boss, the country attaché, is Joe Toft, and I worked for Joe Toft in the United States. He was my boss. I was stationed in Austin. I came on DEA, I should begin, in 1984, and I started my DEA career in Austin, Texas. And under Austin, our bosses were in San Antonio, which was the ASAC, and the ASAC was Joe Toft. So after in 1988, I put in, and I put in for Mexico, and my boss comes in and says, Javier, did you put in for Colombia? I said, no, sir. Well, he says, you're being selected to go to Colombia. And my boss says, hey, we can get out of it because you didn't put in for it. I said, boss, if the paperwork's done, I'll go to Colombia. So that was all by chance. And then my boss in San Antonio, Joe Toft, gets transferred. He gets promoted to the country attaché position of DEA in Colombia. So Mr. Toft knew me, knew my work ethic. So I get to Colombia, and Mr. Toft assigns me the Pablo Escobar investigation. And I really did not know who Pablo Escobar was. But by us being there, the significance of DEA's international operations was that we were in that country as their guests, and real soon we started working hand in hand with our Colombian counterparts, with the police. So we got a confidence level. They trusted us, we trusted them. And so in 1988, I go to Medellin and I'm helping. We had an informal task force from the Colombian National Police. And 1988 is when Pablo Escobar began his real violence. And when I say real violence, I'm talking about his initiation of terrorism. And I'll always remember being at our search block in Medellin, is that we would go after Pablo Escobar and we would be compromised. And then we found out that there were some police officers that were living with us at the search block, and they were advising Pablo Escobar that we were coming after him. So all of a sudden, what we did is we started vetting our police officers, and we did not use anybody from Medellin, which was very important because Pablo Escobar was getting to their families, basically threatening their mothers and their fathers, saying, sir, your officer's assigned to the search block, and he better let you all know when they're coming after me so I can leave. So that was the situation. So we had some corruption. So once we started bringing in officers that were not from Medellin, was very, very important. So now, when we got into the full search of Pablo Escobar, the information by us being there on site was very, very critical, was very important, because we were getting that first-hand intelligence right away. For example, search warrants. We were finding bank accounts. We were finding telephone numbers to relay it back. And Miami was critical at this point because Miami was doing a lot of investigations on members that were belonging to Pablo Escobar. Now, at this time, International Operations came up with a program. It was a TKO program, and Pablo Escobar was, his number was 558. It was a strategy, basically targeted kingpin operation. Later on, we had CPODs, consolidated priority target investigations, but I remember Pablo Escobar was TKO 558. Basically, what DEA told all the offices in DEA was, we are going to target 100% of the traffickers working for Pablo Escobar in the United States. So that's why Miami was critical. in this, in the taking down of Pablo Escobar, because we were doing something that had never been done before in DEA, which was simultaneous takedowns of traffickers. Wow, this was what, I remember in Colombia we were arresting 30, 40 traffickers, and Miami was then arresting 30, 40 traffickers at the same time. But it was because of that timely exchange of intelligence that was going on, which was what made this operation a success. Yes, and let me explain the makeup of the Medellin cartel, because this is very, very important. The makeup was, there was one other trafficker that was more powerful, richer than Pablo Escobar. His name was Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. They called him El Mexicano, the Mexican, because he loved tequila, mariachis, all that stuff. But anyway, when the cartel formed, there was another guy also, a guy named Carlos Later, which was very important. However, Pablo Escobar did not really like Carlos Later. Later was famous. He bought some islands in the in the Bahamas where they would traffic the dope there and then move it. So basically, once Carlos Later got arrested, it was Pablo Escobar, and his first partner was a guy by the name of Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, El Mexicano. And I say that Gacha was more powerful, had more money than Pablo Escobar, because Gacha was the military leader of the cartel, and I'll further explain Gacha. Gacha is credited with forming the cocaine labs around Medellin. Gacha is credited for training his sicarios by Israeli mercenaries. Gacha was the one who hired 12 Israeli mercenaries. There was a Colonel Javier Klein who came in to the jungles of Medellin, brought his own mercenaries, and they would have training classes in the jungles around Medellin to train sicarios how to shoot, how to kill, how to place bombs, how to detonate bombs. And so Gacha had also taken over the emerald market in Colombia. If you know a little bit about emeralds, there are beautiful emeralds that come out of Colombia. But it was Gacha who had that emerald money, and it was Gacha who was producing the cocaine. And Pablo Escobar was also a partner. I mean, there are stories I remember where Pablo Escobar used to have to hold Gacha back because he was killing too many people. Gacha was very, very ruthless. Anyway, in 1989, DEA, we infiltrated a DEA informant into the Gacha organization, and his code name was Navigante. Navigante was responsible for the takedown of Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. Navigante was with Gacha in 1989 in the northern part of Colombia. Obviously, we were aware, we were coordinating with our police officers, and there was a chase, and Gacha gets killed by the Colombian National Police, but it was because of a DEA informant who had given the police that information. So that was very, very important. So after Gacha gets killed, Pablo Escobar becomes the de facto boss of the Medellin cartel. And he had other partners, which were three Ochoa brothers, very famous in Colombia. It was Jorge Luis, Juan David, and Fabio Ochoa. They were doing a lot of loads with Pablo, but they were very afraid of Pablo. They never challenged Pablo, because one thing that we never realized when we started going after Pablo Escobar was the sicarios. Now, if you talk about a sicario, I did not know what a sicario was until I get there. And then all of a sudden, I find out what a sicario is. A sicario is a person who wanted to work for Pablo Escobar and would do anything that Pablo Escobar wanted them to do, which, like you said, when we started going after Pablo Escobar, we started seeing this sicarios. Who are sicarios? What are they doing? I don't know what a sicario is. Like I said, Pablo Escobar used to recruit sicarios. He'd go to a church. It was a Catholic church in Medellin. We did not know. And he used to call it, there's a meeting at La Terraza, at the terrace. We found out, we did not know at the time, but the terrace was a Catholic church that had a terrace on it. And there'd be 300 of these young thugs, about, 15, 16, 17 years old. All Pablo would come in and hug them, kiss them, give them money. And everybody wanted to work for Pablo Escobar. And that's the way he hired them. And a sicario would kill anybody under the orders of Pablo Escobar. I had the experience of interviewing one of the sicarios, and it's an interview I will never forget. Basically, he told me he was 15 years old, and I'll always remember his story. He says, me and my mother were living in the streets of Medellin. We were broke. We were living in cardboard boxes, stealing food. Pablo Escobar saw us. He picked us up. He brought us. He bought us a house, gave us money for food. He says, from there on, I would do anything that Pablo Escobar asked me to do. I would kill. He says, my life is devoted to Pablo Escobar, so I will kill for him and I will follow any orders he wants me to do. And then he started telling me that when Pablo Escobar declared war on Colombia, he put bounties on police officers. Can you imagine a bounty on a human being, $100 a head, what Pablo Escobar was paying for the killing of police officers? Then this thug told me, 15 years old, he says, I've already killed 10 police officers. He says, I walk behind their beat, when they're walking a beat, have a pistol, shoot them in the back of the head, go collect my money. He says, those are the orders from my boss, and I will follow the orders. He says, I will be dead by 22, 23 years old, but as long as I devote my life to Pablo Escobar. And if you multiply that attitude by 500 sicarios, that's what we were dealing with. Pablo Escobar and his terrorism. Now, and if I can also say that in 1988, as I've mentioned before, we saw, I call Pablo Escobar the inventor of narco-terrorism. Why? Because he is the one who was placing bombs in the streets of Medellin, placing car bombs in Bogota, 10 to 15 car bombs on a daily basis. I experienced several car bombs, and it's a feeling, and it's a noise you never will forget. You hear that muffled sound, then you see that black smoke rising, and then you see body parts. 10 to 15 car bombs on a daily basis. That's what Pablo Escobar was doing. That was the start of his terrorism. Then he put a bomb on a commercial airline, Avianca, 1989, going from Bogota to Cali. He thought there was going to be a presidential candidate on board that plane, and that presidential candidate did not travel that day. He was supposed to travel. At the last minute, he canceled his planes. Anyway, they had one of their sicarios, going through the airport. Obviously, they could infiltrate. They had a lot of people working for them. They got a bomb on a briefcase. And when that plane took off going from Bogota to Cali, 1989, and it was supposed to be, they told the sicario it was a recording device, that he was going to be recording the guy sitting on his right because the boss did not trust him. And they told the sicario it was a recording device. He said, do not detonate that switch until the plane takes off, and then you're just going to engage him in casual conversation. Yeah, the plane took off. He turned on that switch, and it was a bomb. 107 innocent people were killed on board that airline, Avianca Airlines, bomb placed by Pablo Escobar terrorism. That was, like I said, the start of Pablo Escobar's terrorism. Then also in 1989, a famous presidential candidate, Luis Carlos Galan, was running for president of Colombia, and he was going to be elected president of Colombia. His approval rating was 95%, and his main platform was that if I'm elected president, I will bring back extradition, which Pablo Escobar hated. Pablo Escobar's fight, a lot of people do not realize, was based on extradition. He did not want to come to the United States to be placed in a jail cell. So that was his fight was all about. And I remember distinctly when they killed presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan. And by the way, Luis Carlos Galan did not like Pablo Escobar because Galan knew that Pablo was a trafficker. So his aim was to extradite Escobar to the United States. And that's why Escobar had him killed. After Escobar gets killed, that's when we put a full court press in Colombia. At Colombia's assistance, Colombia asked DEA for help, for assistance, and we provided. We provided analysts, we provided agents, and again, what we were doing was taking down anybody working for Escobar in the United States, Miami, Houston, New York, Los Angeles, and Escobar had a lot of people working in the city. So that's how that fight on Escobar initiated, by everybody joining forces and going after anybody that was working for Pablo Escobar. Escobar's downfall was basically the killing of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan, because that's when the real pressure from the United States at the assistance of Colombia happened, and it was all because of extradition. So that was very, very important. So basically what happened, because of the terrorism, because of the car bombs, 10 to 15 on a daily basis, people are dying. Innocent people being at the wrong place at the wrong time are getting killed. Like I said, the car bombs. And then he had the audacity, after a car bomb site, they would drop leaflets. And the leaflets would say, the extraditables, I prefer a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. The extraditables was Pablo Escobar. It was him. That was his calling card. So he was taking credit for as many people as he killed. Thousands of Colombian police officers died at the hands of sicarios. Thousands of innocent people died at the hands of the car bombs. Thousands of people were getting, like I said, killed. He was starting to kidnap important politicians. He kidnapped, there's a famous journalist, Diana Turbay, who was kidnapped. There's a famous mayor, Andres Pastrana, later on became president, who was kidnapped, trying to show Colombia basically to bend as to what Escobar wanted them to do, and that worked. So in 1991, because of the pressure that we were putting and because of the terrorism, that's when Colombia struck a deal with Pablo Escobar, and that's the famous self-surrender that we all know happened, where Pablo Escobar self-surrendered into his own prison that he built. Pablo Escobar financed his prison. Pablo Escobar, he paid the guards' salaries, and Pablo Escobar did not allow any inspection, any visitors into his so-called prison. And that was because of Pablo Escobar's terrorism that happened. However, after about a year in his so-called prison, basically Pablo Escobar escapes. We're talking 1992, and he escapes because DEA finds out that Pablo is killing a lot of people in Medellin. So basically, Colombia says, we're going to move Pablo Escobar. So they came in to move him, about 20 Colombian military guys, and there's a firefight. And Pablo Escobar and 7 sicarios walk out of his so-called prison. Myself and my partner then, Steve Murphy, joins me. And I'll never forget, the first day after Pablo Escobar escapes, we go to the prison and we find out that the prison is a sham. It's a country club. There were no bars. Pablo Escobar was living a life of luxury. And this is the time that the Colombian government asks for our assistance, and we are embedded in the Colombian National Police Search Block. When I mean embedded, we are living with our partners in Medellin, going after one person, Pablo Escobar, and his organization. So when you talk about international operations, and I always remember one of the bosses at this time, Bobby Nieves, our financial boss, was a legend at DEA, Greg Pasick, and I always, I have to say that, Greg Pasick was financial, DEA operations, was ahead of his time. He was a guru of financial. Wow. So we started seizing money from Pablo Escobar, seizing bank accounts, going after Escobar's financial organization, the United States. And I always credit Mr. Pasick for being ahead of that ball game by having that knowledge, by going after accounts that made a difference. So by international operations, again, it was takedowns in Miami, New York, LA, Houston, anywhere that Pablo Escobar had people. But by us being there with the search block in Medellin, and this was at the request of the Colombian government, was very important because we were getting that first-hand information. We were getting that Title III intercept information. We were getting that, bank accounts, the phone numbers belonging to traffickers in the United States. So that was a huge success. And, at this time, we were basically setting up the model for DEA, setting up how we did it with the help of our foreign counterparts, with the help of our DEA international operations. So by us being there, and this is at the request of the Colombian government, we're able to contribute to the takedown of a total and complete organization that was led by Pablo Escobar. There's a lot of discussion of how we dismantle the Medellin cartel, and the most important part of it was by us being there, cooperating with the Colombian government. And remember, we're guests. But that exchange of intelligence was critical to DEA, and I cannot overemphasize and also, we were taking down a lot of cocaine loads that were going to Europe, the United States. We were taking down the famous cocaine laboratories, at this time. And the cocaine laboratories were producing about 1,000 kilos of cocaine on a daily basis. And DEA did a study, and basically we said, hey, to produce 1 kilo of cocaine, it's going to cost about $1,000. To send it to the United States is going to cost about $5,000. So Pablo Escobar's initial investment for 1 kilo was about $5,000. During the mid-'80s, that kilo in Miami was going anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000. That kilo in Europe was getting Pablo Escobar $100,000 per 1 kilo of cocaine. So if you do the math, 2,500 kilos of cocaine that Pablo Escobar was sending on a daily basis, that's how Pablo Escobar was getting billions of dollars, billions. His total wealth was about $30 billion. And this is why Pablo Escobar became so powerful, because of that money that was being brought in because of the cocaine. And Pablo Escobar was experimenting in the banking system, so he wanted a lot of cash. So Pablo Escobar had a lot of cash to operate. And, you know, and it's very important. One thing I forgot to mention, that there was another trafficker that was very, very important. And I always say that he never got the credit. The guy's name was Gustavo Gaviria Rivera, who was Pablo Escobar's first cousin. They loved each other. They were like brothers. But when I say that Gustavo Gaviria has always been neglected in this story, Gustavo Gaviria was the brains of the Medellin cartel, because he had the distribution contacts all over the world. Gustavo Gaviria was dealing with the Mexican traffickers during the mid-'80s. He was dealing with the famous General Noriega in Panama at this time. He was dealing with the Caribbean countries. So we always say that Gustavo Gaviria, Pablo Escobar's cousin, basically his brother, was the brains of the cartel, because he had the distribution contacts all over the world. Once Gustavo Gaviria in 1989 gets killed in an operation by the Colombian National Police, but he was the one who had the contacts all over the world. That was very, very important. And like I said, I cannot overemphasize that cooperation, that exchange of that timely information that was being done at this time. And this is the first time Pablo Escobar's organization, all of it, had been taken down. I'm talking from the bottom to the top. I'm talking the top to the bottom. Like I said, this is the first time in DEA that a total trafficking organization is dismantled. Yeah, the destruction of the Medellin cartel basically affected DEA operations, because also it was a learning process. What we did right, what we did wrong. So we were able to take valuable lessons and apply them to other cartels. For example, after Pablo Escobar gets killed in 1993, the trafficking pretty much stopped for a while. The car bomb, the violence stopped. However, in Colombia, there was another trafficking organization that was sitting back, being quiet, was learning what not to do, and that was a Cali cartel. So we learned that a huge trafficking organization had been taken down. And then we learned that later on, another trafficking organization takes over the Pablo Escobar organization, which was a Cali cartel. So we were in constant learning mode. Like I said, learning lessons, what to do, what not to do. So we learned and we implemented, this type of strategies with other organizations. And that's what basically later led on to our, working with our, with our host governments and going after these traffickers. Yes, it changed because the taking down of the Medellin cartel changed the illicit drugs in the United States, because of it was, for a while, there was some scarcity of cocaine. However, because of the other trafficking organizations, the trafficking started up again, and it was a little harder to get in the streets. But after, for example, the Cali cartel organization Cocaine was also more, it was still available in the streets of the United States. So we were learning as we were going after these traffickers. And, one of the lessons we learned is that, we took one organization down and another one had been taken over. So we had to apply the same principles to this other organizations. The changes after Pablo Escobar were that we needed to work closer with our host countries in going after these traffickers, and it was a matter of uh, trusting our partners, helping them out, training, which was very important. We then started providing a lot of training. We started providing a lot of resources, a lot more equipment, so we could basically gather that intelligence. So in international operations, then we started, I remember sending like Colombian police officers to train in the United States. We started sending them to DEA training schools, sort of helping them along as to the techniques that we were using to combat these traffickers, which was very important. The training, the resources, and like I said, basically teaching them what DEA was all about, and teaching them our DEA techniques, our tactics, our intelligence, resources, and to go going after these traffickers.